in this lesson, we'll talk a little bit more about the display of our geometry and working with the actual polygons. So open up a fresh scene here, and we want to start to work with some geometry. So let's draw it onto our canvas. I'm going to grab a cylinder, and let's draw this onto the canvas. Let's hit T to go to edit mode, and there's our cylinder. Now we can kind of see the facets, so we get a good idea of the resolution of this, but we really don't see the actual edges of the polygons. So to do that, we can choose to turn on polyframes. We can do that with Shift F. Okay, we can also, there's a button right down here where we can't quite see, and you can also access that under Transform. There's a polyframe button, Poly F. That will allow you to toggle that on and off. You can also hit the space bar and turn the polyframe button on, and you can see we now get a good view of the actual edges. So if we want to have a kind of a stony base to sculpt from, let's say that we want to kind of work with this as our base, so we'll go down to Initialize. Let's take the Z size down a little bit. Okay, and we can change the divisions here along the side if we want to, and make this a little bit deeper. Keeping in mind that we are going to be subdividing this. So add a few subdivisions or a few divisions in here. If you wanted to taper the top, you could do that. You could also make it hollow inside if you wanted to do that. All right. Now, once we have this kind of the way that we want it, at some point we can convert this into a polymesh so that we can begin sculpting. You can see that the color changes, and that's just because we're now looking at the object's polygroup, which will happen when we turn on our polyframe. We not only see the edges, but we see the colored polygons. And this is a way for ZBrush to kind of distinguish between different groups of polygon faces. And we'll talk more about polygroups later on, but the main idea is that we're able to define different areas of our mesh, to be able to select them and to do different actions based on those particular polygroups, which we'll do as we go down the road. We can also come in and rotate this, so we can go into deformation, and I want to change the axis of rotation to X. So I'll highlight X, and then I'm just going to put in 90 degrees on the rotation, and you can see that rotates it down. Now, if you want to start to select polygons, a lot of times it's good to turn off perspective because you can get a straight-on view from the side or from the top, and you don't get any sort of perspective distortion in there. So let's say that we want to get rid of the bottom polygons here. Let me turn off the floor so we can kind of see those a little bit better. So you can see we have two caps. Let's say that we want to delete the caps on the bottom. How will we do that? Well, we can display or hide polygons by hitting Control Shift and making sure that we've got the Select Rectangle brush selected. If I click on this, you can see that there are a number of different brushes that we can select, and we want to make sure the Select Rectangle is selected. So what this will do is allow us to either show or hide polygons by dragging across them. So Control Shift, if I just drag out into the canvas, you can see that there's a green box, and anything inside the green box is going to be shown. Okay, so if I use my space bar to move this over some polygons and release, you can see that those polygons that were completely inside the green box are shown. Now there's nothing that's showing on the cap, and that's just because those were not completely inside that box. If I hit Control Shift and click in the canvas, it brings everything back. Let's do that again. So I'll just Control Shift, drag this out, space bar to move it over wherever I want it. Let go of my mouse, and we've got those visible. Now what if I Control Shift drag in the canvas? I'm inverting my visibility. So now everything that was invisible is visible, and vice versa. If I Control Shift click, it'll bring everything back. So what this means is we can selectively hide and show different polygon faces on our model. And when we do that, we can in ZBrush delete some of those polygons. So let's say that we want to get rid of the polygons at the bottom. We can come in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and use the green box. If I hit Alt while holding down, it'll actually turn it red, and it'll do the inverse. So if I wanted to hide everything, I could hide it. Now the hiding part only has to be overlapping the polygons. So that if I come in here with green, you can see it didn't show the ones that it was partially covering, that top row, but if I change it to red, it's going to go ahead and hide those. So it works slightly differently. So if I want to only select the faces on the very bottom, I can drag across the green, and now only those have been selected. Now I want to invert that, so I'll hit Control-Shift, drag, and now I've got those invisible. Now we're going to go to the Geometry subpalette, and we're going to go to Modify Topology. Let's open that up, and here's where we're going to be able to do a lot of the modifications on the actual base polygons themselves. And so right now we've got some hidden geometry. We want to delete it, so we're going to hit this button right here, Delete Hidden. We hit that button, Control-Shift, click, and now you can see that there's nothing else in there. Now we can't see the back side of this geometry, so if you want to be able to see that, the inside of the geometry, you can come down to Display Properties, and you can turn on Double. And that'll just show you the back sides of those polygons. So if it's a little confusing or you can't see through things, you can turn on Double to be able to see that. Okay. So now that we've got kind of some base geometry, let's in the next lesson talk about subdividing, because that's really the key component here in ZBrush, is the ability to subdivide our model into millions and millions of polygons so that we can start to sculpt and add all that cool high resolution detail that we want to add to our characters or whatever it is that we're building. So in the next lesson, we'll talk about that, about subdividing, about working with levels, navigating up and down those levels, deleting levels, and just generally dealing with our subdivided meshes. So we'll go ahead and talk about that in the next lesson.